Yeah, it depends. The way that and this is an important caveat that non-compete laws are state statutes, and so the laws vary by state. But there are some general principles that are hold mostly true, and that is that in most states, a non-compete, in order to be enforceable, has to be reasonable both in duration and scope. So most states have interpreted in the context of a sale of business that 5 years is reasonable duration. That's why that's kind of become the norm. Scope varies widely, and it's important to understand that non-competes and the reason that they you know there's a movement to kind of ban them in certain contexts, mostly on the employment side, but not on the business side, is that a non-compete really is not intended to be punitive. It's intended to protect intellectual property. That's what its intent has always been, right? And so you say, hey, if I'm hiring you, Ray, to build this special piece for a rocket, I can't afford to have you leave my company, Northrop Grumman, and go to Lockheed with all of that knowledge and start building the piece for Lockheed. Therefore, I'm going to impose a non-compete on you that says you cannot go work for a competitor and take that specialized knowledge. I can't impose a non-compete that just says, hey, Ryan, you're a secretary and I'm going to impose a 3-year non-compete just because I don't like my competitors, so I don't want you to go help them or work for them, right? You have to actually be protecting a legitimate interest. And so why do I give that background? And sorry for the long-winded answer. The point is that if you are selling an HVAC company in DFW, there is no legitimate business interest that you are protecting in Detroit with a non-compete, right? You only do business in the DFW area, maybe slightly beyond, right? And so a nationwide non-compete for an HVAC sale and install company based in DFW would be way too broad geographically, and no court in Michigan or Texas would enforce that in Detroit, right? Conversely, if you sell an e-commerce business that's supplying supplements on Amazon FBA store all across the country, that's a different story, because if you uproot from DFW and move to Portland, Maine, it doesn't really matter where you live. You are competing with that business everywhere in the country. So in that case, you may actually have a nationwide non-compete. So lawyers take a lot of heat for "it depends" answers, but it really, really does depend. And it's important to understand the metes and bounds and have a correctly crafted non-compete, because in some states, again, this varies by state, in some states, if you have a non-compete that's too broad and unenforceable, the entire non-compete gets thrown out, right? As opposed to some other states have rules that say, hey, if you have too broad of a non-compete, that the court is just, when you're trying to enforce it, the court is just going to revise it and say, hey, nationwide is too broad, but 50-mile radius around DFW is fine. And so you're trying to compete in Rockwall, we're going to enforce it against you, even though nationwide was too broad. There are some states where if they're trying to compete 10 miles away in your home territory, but your non-compete was drafted to be anywhere in America, it's unenforceable. Boom, the whole non-compete's out and all bets are off, right? So you got to be really careful with non-competes.
And to be fair, I love the "it depends" answer, because I've had clients call me and like, "What do you think about this?" I'm like, "I'll tell you what I think, but if they sue or you sue, don't call me because
Yeah, because it
I'm not
depends.
even an attorney. Like, I'll give you what I've seen before, but my opinion is worthless on this issue. So
Yeah.
maybe you should call me. I can see something go, yeah, you might should talk to an attorney because that looks kind of weird, but is it going to hold up? I don't know. I think a lot of people in the space, to your point earlier about we're talking about attorneys. A lot of people in the space in general will give kind of legal advice or tax advice or advice. It's like, no, 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 no. Stay in your lane and
Yeah.
master that lane, because this is a very, very important process, especially to the seller or the buyer. And if you try to start being a master and jack of all trades, you're really going to fail. And so, like, you probably understand a lot about tax implications and stuff like that. But I would guess you're probably going to also want them to talk to a tax expert or stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff that you can know, but to be an expert to get the nuances, and that's where the "it depends" answers come in, because you begin to understand, like you were just saying at the end there with the non-compete. Well, it does depend on the state, on how it's written
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And so it
Yeah.
does, it really does depend.
Yeah. Yeah, and for seller, and I don't want to lose track of the non-compete discussion for sellers either, because in the business sale non context, that this is far more a buyer protection. But one of the things that can make your business attractive for a successful exit is making sure that you have effective non-competes where they're allowed and needed within your own company. And so understanding these puts and takes and knowing what you're going to be restricted from doing, it can help you get ahead of, is okay, if I want to exit 2 years from now, then I want to start revamping my onboarding paperwork as I have employee turnover to kind of tighten these covenants up and make sure that when buyers are shopping my business in 2027, they're very comfortable that my main sales guy can't take my sales list across the street to a competitor the day after closing, because
Yeah.
that is a huge risk. The business sale non-compete only restricts the selling equity owners of the business. It does not restrict the employees. And so if we don't have those in place, prior to closing, it can make your business kind of unattractive. So